You think silence makes you safe in here? Travis Kane's voice cut across cell block C before the steel door even finished sliding open, and every conversation in the room dropped like someone had pulled the power. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale wash across concrete floors polished by years of restless pacing, and 40 inmates turned toward the entrance as the new arrival stepped inside without rushing, without hesitation, without looking at anyone. Darius Coleman walked in wearing standard-issue khakis and a gray shirt that hung loose across his shoulders, his steps measured, calm, as if he were entering a quiet waiting room instead of one of the most unpredictable units in the facility. Travis leaned back against the metal table at the center of the block, arms folded, a slow grin forming as he sized up the newcomer. He was used to this moment, the arrival of someone new, someone uncertain, someone looking for a place to stand, but Darius didn't search for anything. He didn't scan faces, didn't stiffen when the room went silent, didn't shift his weight like most men did when they realized they were being watched. He simply kept walking until he reached an empty seat near the far wall and lowered himself onto the bench like he had already decided the space belonged to him. Travis tilted his head slightly, curious now, the grin fading into something more deliberate. "You hear me, new guy?" he called again, louder this time, drawing a few quiet chuckles from the men around him. Darius didn't respond. He didn't even look up. The air tightened, the kind of tension that formed when expectations broke in a place built on routine. A man near the card table nudged his neighbor, whispering something under his breath, while another leaned back to get a better view. Travis pushed himself off the table and took a few slow steps forward, boots echoing lightly against the concrete. "You lost, or you just don't talk?" he asked, stopping a few feet away, his tone calm but edged with challenge. Darius lifted his eyes briefly, not with defiance, not with fear, just a steady glance that lingered for half a second before returning to the floor. It wasn't the reaction Travis expected, and the quiet that followed stretched longer than anyone in the room liked. A correctional officer near the observation window shifted his stance, watching closely now, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Travis exhaled through his nose, almost amused, but there was something else behind his expression, something that flickered when he realized the new inmate hadn't flinched once. Around them, the hum of the block resumed slowly, conversations restarting in low tones, but attention remained fixed on the far wall, where Darius sat with his hands resting loosely on his knees, posture relaxed, breathing steady, as if none of it mattered. Travis stopped a few feet away, studying him like a puzzle that didn't fit, and for the first time that afternoon, the loudest voice in cell block C had nothing left to say, while the quiet man who had just walked in seemed completely untouched by the storm he had already started. The quiet did not fade after Travis stepped back. It shifted, stretching across the block like something waiting to happen, and Darius Coleman remained seated against the far wall, elbows resting loosely on his knees, eyes calm, posture relaxed in a way that felt unfamiliar in a place where tension usually lived in every movement. A tray clattered somewhere near the back table. A low conversation resumed near the phones, but glances kept drifting toward him as if the room had not yet decided what to make of a man who refused to perform the usual rituals of arrival. Most newcomers tried to talk, tried to align themselves with a group, tried to signal where they belonged, but Darius did none of that. He sat still, breathing steady, watching the slow rhythm of the block like he had been there before, like nothing in the room surprised him. Travis Kane noticed it too, and curiosity replaced the earlier confidence in his expression as he circled back toward the center table, keeping Darius in his peripheral vision. A man with a shaved head leaned closer to Travis and muttered something under his breath, and Travis gave a faint shrug, but his eyes did not leave the far wall. The correctional officer behind the reinforced glass adjusted his stance again, reading the body language that rarely lied inside a unit like this. Darius lifted his gaze once more, not scanning the room, just observing the rhythm of movement, the pacing near the railing, the quiet negotiation over a deck of worn cards, the distant hum of ventilation pushing cool air across the concrete floor. His stillness did not look like caution, it looked deliberate, like a man choosing silence rather than hiding behind it. Travis tapped his fingers against the metal table, then pushed away again, taking slower steps this time, not aggressive, just measured, as if he were testing a boundary that had not been drawn yet. "You always this quiet?" he asked, stopping several feet away, his voice no longer loud enough to carry across the block, but still clear enough to hold attention. Darius glanced up again, calm, steady, then gave a small nod that lasted barely a second before his gaze settled forward. It was not defiance, not submission, just acknowledgement, and the simplicity of it unsettled more than any reaction Travis expected. A few inmates exchanged looks, unsure whether the tension had ended or simply paused. Someone laughed softly at a distant table, but it sounded forced, like an attempt to reset the atmosphere. Travis exhaled slowly, folding his arms again, and for a moment he looked less certain than before, studying Darius with the quiet calculation of someone realizing the usual rules might not apply. The block returned to its rhythm, but attention remained fixed on the man who had entered without noise and somehow shifted the balance without saying more than a single word. Darius remained seated, posture unchanged, calm anchored in place, and the longer he stayed silent, the more the room seemed to lean toward him, as if the quiet itself had begun to carry weight. The rhythm of cell block C settled into a slow afternoon cadence, but the quiet around Darius Coleman never fully dissolved. It lingered like a pressure system hovering just beneath the surface, and Travis Kane felt it every time his eyes drifted back toward the far wall where the newcomer remained seated without shifting, without signaling, without trying to belong. A metal chair scraped across the floor near the television area, and a few inmates gathered for the afternoon news, but their attention kept slipping away, drawn back toward the man who seemed untouched by the usual weight of the room. Travis leaned against the railing on the second tier, watching from above now, studying the way Darius moved when he finally stood to stretch his legs, slow and deliberate, shoulders relaxed, steps measured like someone accustomed to controlling space rather than reacting to it. A tall inmate near the phone stepped aside instinctively as Darius passed, not out of fear, not out of respect, but something quieter, something harder to define, and Travis noticed that too. "You see that?" One of the men beside him muttered quietly, and Travis gave a small nod, still watching. Darius stopped near the water fountain, filled a paper cup, and took a slow sip, his gaze neutral, his posture balanced, his breathing steady in a way that felt out of place in a room where tension usually lived in clenched jaws and restless pacing. Travis pushed away from the railing and descended the metal stairs, each step echoing softly, drawing attention without needing to raise his voice. The correctional officer near the door shifted slightly again, reading the shift in energy as Travis crossed the floor toward Darius with calm but unmistakable intent. A few conversations faded as he approached, and the air thickened with expectation. Travis stopped beside the fountain, close enough now to measure the difference in height, in stance, in composure. "You planning on staying quiet all day?" he asked, voice low but clear, his tone less mocking now and more probing, as if he were testing a surface that refused to crack. Darius turned his head slightly, meeting Travis's gaze with the same calm expression, then gave another small nod, the movement subtle, controlled, and strangely final. The response lasted less than a second, but it shifted something again, and Travis felt it. A man at the nearby table leaned back, arms crossed, watching carefully, while another inmate paused mid-sentence, attention fixed on the two figures standing near the wall. Travis exhaled slowly, then stepped aside, not retreating, not conceding, just circling, trying to read what silence refused to explain. Darius set the empty cup aside and returned to his seat with the same measured pace, lowering himself onto the bench without looking back, and the room seemed to lean with him again, as if the quiet man had redrawn the boundaries of the block simply by refusing to react. Travis remained standing near the center, arms folded, eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time since the new arrival walked through the door, uncertainty flickered across his face, because the longer Darius stayed calm, the clearer it became that silence was not weakness, it was control, and the realization unsettled the loudest voice in cell block C more than any confrontation ever had. The afternoon light filtered through the narrow reinforced windows high above cell block C, casting pale rectangles across the concrete floor, and the quiet tension that followed Darius Coleman had not faded. It had grown more deliberate, more noticeable, like the entire block was waiting for something it could not yet name. A gray-haired inmate named Leonard Brooks sat at the far end of the metal table near the television, his fingers wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold, his eyes narrowing as he watched Darius from across the room. Leonard had spent more than 20 years moving through different facilities, and he had learned to read people the way others read newspapers, scanning posture, breathing, eye movement, and silence. He leaned forward slightly as Darius shifted his shoulders and adjusted his seat, a movement small enough that most would ignore it, but Leonard noticed the balance in it, the control, the absence of tension in his hands. Travis Kane remained near the center of the block, pretending to focus on a card game, but his attention kept drifting toward the far wall, and he noticed Leonard watching too. "You know him?" Travis asked quietly as Leonard stood and walked past, his tone casual but edged with curiosity. Leonard did not answer immediately. He simply moved closer to the water fountain, pausing just long enough to glance at Darius from a different angle, studying the calm expression, the steady breathing, the relaxed shoulders that did not tighten even when footsteps echoed nearby. Darius looked up briefly, their eyes meeting for a fraction of a second, and Leonard felt a flicker of recognition he could not yet explain. He turned away slowly, returning toward the table, but his mind stayed fixed on the quiet man near the wall. "He does not move like someone new," Leonard finally said under his breath as he sat down again, and Travis frowned slightly, the comment settling heavier than expected. A few inmates nearby exchanged looks, sensing the shift in tone, sensing that something unspoken had entered the room. The correctional officer behind the glass noticed Leonard watching and leaned forward slightly, following the same line of sight. Darius remained calm, his hands resting loosely, his posture unchanged, but now the attention around him felt different, less curious and more cautious. Leonard leaned back in his chair, eyes still fixed on Darius, and memories stirred quietly. Flashes of a television mounted in another facility, a late-night broadcast, a crowded arena filled with noise, and a fighter moving with the same calm balance he had just witnessed. He did not speak the thought yet, but his expression shifted, and Travis noticed it immediately. "What is it?" Travis asked, his voice lower now, more careful. Leonard shook his head slowly, not ready to confirm what he suspected, but the room had already begun to lean again, the quiet deepening as the first hint of recognition formed in the mind of the one man who had seen enough to know that silence like that rarely belonged to someone ordinary. Leonard Brooks did not look away this time, and the longer he studied Darius Coleman, the more the quiet recognition grew, like a memory pushing its way through fog, and he leaned forward slowly, elbows resting on his knees, eyes narrowing as he replayed the movements he had just seen. The calm shoulders, the balanced stance, the way Darius shifted his weight without tension, all of it felt familiar in a way Leonard could not ignore. Travis Kane noticed the change immediately, the subtle tightening of Leonard's jaw, the way his eyes tracked every small motion near the far wall. "You keep staring," Travis said quietly, his tone careful now, and Leonard exhaled slowly before responding. "I have seen that kind of calm before," he said under his breath, not loud enough for the whole block, but enough for Travis and the men nearby to hear. The comment traveled faster than intended, carried through glances and subtle shifts in posture as attention sharpened again. Darius remained seated, unaware or unconcerned, his hands still resting loosely, his breathing steady, but the atmosphere around him began to thicken, like a storm forming without wind. Leonard leaned back slightly, and the memory finally surfaced, not as a full image but as fragments, bright lights overhead, a packed arena, the distant echo of a crowd reacting to something sudden and unexpected, and a fighter standing calm in the center of it all, breathing steady while the noise swelled around him. Leonard blinked slowly, still not certain, but the possibility alone unsettled him. Travis folded his arms, watching Leonard now more than Darius, sensing that the balance in the block had shifted again. "You think he is somebody?" Travis asked, and Leonard hesitated before answering, not ready to confirm, not ready to be wrong. "I think he moves like someone who has nothing to prove," Leonard said quietly, and the words carried weight in a place where confidence often came with noise. A few inmates nearby exchanged looks, their curiosity deepening, their earlier assumptions fading. The correctional officer behind the glass leaned forward again, reading the shift in body language across the block. Darius finally stood once more, stretching his shoulders slowly, and the movement drew every eye again, not because it was dramatic, but because it was controlled, measured, and deliberate. Leonard watched closely, his expression tightening, and the memory sharpened further, flashes of televised highlights, commentators describing calm under pressure, a fighter known for patience rather than aggression. Leonard did not say the thought out loud yet, but his silence spoke enough, and Travis felt it. "You recognize him, do not you?" Travis asked, voice lower now, almost cautious, and Leonard shook his head slightly, not in denial but in hesitation. "Not yet," he replied, and the block seemed to hold its breath, the quiet stretching tighter as the first real doubt settled into the loudest voice in Cell Block C. Because the longer Darius Coleman remained calm, the more it felt like the room was waiting for a truth that had not yet been spoken. The quiet in Cell Block C tightened as Darius Coleman stepped away from the bench again, his movements slow and controlled, shoulders loose, posture balanced, and the attention that followed him now felt different, heavier, as if the entire block had begun to sense that something important was unfolding beneath the surface. Travis Kane watched from the center of the floor, arms folded, his earlier confidence replaced with a cautious curiosity he could not fully hide. Leonard Brooks leaned forward in his chair, eyes tracking every motion, the fragments of memory growing clearer with each second. Darius moved toward the railing on the lower tier, resting his forearms lightly against the metal, his gaze drifting upward toward the narrow windows that filtered pale afternoon light into the block. He looked calm, almost detached, as if the noise around him belonged to another world. A few inmates nearby lowered their voices, instinctively creating space without anyone asking. The correctional officer behind the reinforced glass shifted again, noticing the subtle shift in posture across multiple inmates, a quiet signal that tension had not disappeared but had evolved. Travis stepped forward slowly, stopping several feet away, careful this time, measuring the distance, measuring the silence. "You always this calm?" he asked, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. Darius glanced sideways briefly, not challenging, not avoiding, just acknowledging the question before turning his gaze forward again. The response was minimal, but it carried weight, and Travis felt it settle into the air between them. Leonard rose from his seat, taking a few slow steps closer, his mind now replaying images more clearly, flashes of televised commentary, a calm fighter pacing inside a cage, controlled breathing, steady eyes, patience that frustrated louder opponents. Leonard stopped near the table, watching Darius carefully, and the recognition sharpened further. He did not speak yet, but his expression changed, and Travis noticed immediately. Around them, the block resumed a quiet rhythm, but conversations felt thinner, distracted, as attention continued to drift back to the same point. Darius pushed away from the railing and walked back toward his seat, each step measured, balanced, unhurried, and Leonard watched the footwork closely, noticing the precision in how he placed each step, the subtle shift of weight, the relaxed shoulders that never tightened. "That is not normal," Leonard muttered under his breath, and the comment carried further than intended. Travis turned slightly, eyes narrowing. "You sure about that?" he asked quietly. Leonard nodded once, slow and deliberate, his gaze still fixed on Darius. "I have seen that before," he said, and the certainty in his voice changed the atmosphere again. Travis exhaled slowly, the confidence he carried earlier now replaced with a growing unease he did not expect. Darius sat down once more, posture unchanged, calm anchored in place, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before, as if the room itself had begun to realize that the quiet man who walked into Cell Block C was not just another newcomer, but someone whose presence alone was slowly shifting the balance without raising his voice. The tension inside Cell Block C no longer felt subtle, it had settled into the air like pressure before a storm, and Travis Kane sensed it as clearly as anyone in the room, his arms still folded but his posture no longer relaxed. Darius Coleman remained seated along the far wall, calm as ever, his breathing steady, his gaze neutral, but now the quiet around him had turned into something heavier, something that made even the loudest voices lower their tone without realizing why. Leonard Brooks stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as the memory finally aligned with the man in front of him. He watched the way Darius shifted his shoulders again, The small adjustment of balance, the relaxed stance that never wasted energy, and the recognition struck him fully this time. Leonard exhaled slowly, then spoke just loud enough for Travis and the nearest inmates to hear. "I have seen him before," he said, his voice calm but certain. Travis turned immediately, the faint unease in his expression sharpening into focus. "Where?" Travis asked, his tone lower now, careful, and Leonard did not answer right away. He kept watching Darius, replaying the memory once more. Bright lights, a packed arena, commentators describing patience, control, silence before sudden movement. "On television," Leonard finally said, and the words traveled faster than expected, carried by the quiet curiosity already spreading through the block. A few inmates nearby leaned in slightly, their earlier assumptions fading as attention sharpened. Travis shifted his weight, eyes returning to Darius, measuring him again with new caution. "You think he is some kind of fighter?" Travis asked quietly, and Leonard nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Not just some kind," Leonard replied, and the certainty in his tone changed the atmosphere again. Darius remained unaware or unconcerned, sitting with the same calm posture, his hands resting loosely, but now the room felt different, as if everyone had begun to look at him through a new lens. The correctional officer behind the glass leaned forward slightly, noticing the cluster of attention forming near Leonard and Travis. A man near the card table whispered something to his neighbor, and both glanced toward the far wall. Travis stepped forward again, stopping a few feet away from Darius, not confrontational, just curious now, his earlier confidence replaced with caution. "You got a name?" Travis asked, voice steady, and Darius lifted his eyes briefly, meeting his gaze with the same calm expression. "Darius," he answered quietly, the first full word he had spoken since entering the block. The simplicity of it settled into the room, and Leonard's eyes narrowed further. "Darius Coleman?" Leonard asked, his voice barely above a whisper, and Darius glanced toward him for a moment, then gave a small nod. The reaction was subtle, but it shifted everything. Leonard leaned back slowly, a faint expression of realization crossing his face, and Travis felt the change immediately. "You know him," Travis said, and Leonard exhaled quietly before answering. "I think everyone outside these walls used to know him," Leonard replied, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before, as the first true hint of who Darius Coleman really was began to settle across Cell Block C. The silence after Leonard's words settled across Cell Block C like a weight pressing down on every conversation, and Travis Kane felt it first, the shift that turned curiosity into caution, the kind of quiet that followed when a room realized it might have misjudged someone. Darius Coleman remained seated against the far wall, calm and composed, his posture unchanged, as if the growing attention around him did not matter. Leonard Brooks leaned forward slowly, eyes still fixed on Darius, and the recognition in his expression became clearer with every second. "You fought professionally," Leonard said quietly, not as a question but as a realization, and a few inmates nearby stopped moving entirely, their focus sharpening. Darius did not respond immediately. He simply looked at Leonard for a brief moment, then lowered his gaze again, and that silence answered more than words. Travis shifted his stance, arms no longer folded, his posture less certain than before. "You serious?" Travis asked, his voice lower now, and Leonard nodded once. "I remember the way he moves," Leonard replied, calm but confident. "That kind of balance does not come from nowhere." The comment traveled quickly, carried through glances and subtle shifts in posture, and the block began to change. A man near the television leaned forward, whispering something to the inmate beside him, while another looked toward Darius with new caution. The correctional officer behind the reinforced glass leaned closer, noticing the cluster of attention forming. Darius remained still, his breathing steady, his shoulders relaxed, but now every movement he made felt significant, even the slight tilt of his head as he listened to the room around him. Travis took a slow step forward, stopping several feet away again, measuring the calm in front of him. "You used to be famous or something?" Travis asked, his tone careful, and Darius looked up briefly, meeting his gaze with quiet composure. "I used to compete," he said simply, his voice even and controlled, and the understatement only deepened the curiosity in the room. Leonard exhaled slowly, almost certain now. You were not just competing, Leonard said, his voice steady. You were winning. The words settled heavily, and the silence that followed felt different, more respectful, more cautious. Travis glanced around, noticing the change in how others were looking at Darius now, the subtle shift from curiosity to awareness. A man near the railing stepped aside as Darius stood again, stretching his shoulders slowly, his movements measured, calm, and precise. Leonard watched closely, and the memory sharpened again, bright lights, commentators describing discipline, patience, and control. I remember now, Leonard murmured, and the room seemed to lean toward him. Travis looked back at Darius, the earlier confidence fully replaced by uncertainty, because the quiet man who walked into cell block C no longer looked like a newcomer. He looked like someone whose presence alone had already changed the balance without raising his voice. The realization settled slowly across cell block C, not with noise, but with a quiet shift in posture, in glances, in the subtle distance that formed around Darius Coleman as he returned to his seat with the same calm, measured pace. Leonard Brooks leaned back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on the quiet man, the memory now fully clear in his mind. Bright arena lights, commentators describing patience, discipline, and a fighter known for ending matches without wasting movement. Travis Kane stood a few feet away, his earlier confidence gone, replaced by a cautious silence that spoke louder than anything he had said before. The block resumed its rhythm, but it felt different now, softer, more deliberate, as if the room itself had adjusted to a new balance. A man near the television lowered his voice mid-conversation, while another shifted aside as Darius passed, small gestures that signaled awareness without a word. The correctional officer behind the reinforced glass watched carefully, noticing the change in energy, the absence of tension where confrontation had once seemed inevitable. Darius sat down again, hands resting loosely, posture relaxed, breathing steady, as if nothing had changed, yet everything around him had. Travis finally spoke, his voice quieter than it had been all afternoon. You never said anything, he muttered, not quite a question, and Darius glanced up briefly, his expression calm. I did not need to, he replied simply, and the words settled across the block with quiet authority. Leonard nodded slightly, understanding the weight behind that answer, and a few inmates nearby exchanged knowing looks. The afternoon light shifted slowly across the concrete floor, and the tension that once filled the room had dissolved into something else, something closer to respect. Travis stepped back toward the center table, no longer watching with challenge, but with quiet acceptance, and the loudest voice in cell block C had finally fallen silent. Darius remained still, calm anchored in place, and the room seemed to follow his rhythm without realizing it. After a moment, Leonard spoke again, not loudly, just enough for those nearby to hear. Real strength does not need noise, he said, and the words lingered as Darius lifted his gaze toward the narrow windows above, the pale light reflecting across his face. He did not smile, he did not react, he simply remained calm, the same quiet presence that had changed the balance from the moment he walked in. And as the afternoon moved forward, one truth settled across cell block C without anyone needing to say it out loud. The quietest man in the room had never needed to prove anything, because the calm he carried spoke louder than any challenge ever could.